So this is a short video letting you know about the different methods of delegated legislation. Under the AQA syllabus at the moment, this is a 10-mark question, and in order to get the best out of this 10-mark question, you need to be able to do the following things. First of all, you need to be able to define what delegated legislation is, and then you need to address each of the types, which is something we're going to have a look at in a moment. You need to say who makes it, when it's used, what the Parent Act is, if that's appropriate, and give 2 examples, being very clear on what the actual delegated legislation is. So let's have a look at how that's done. So the first thing you need to know is Parliament has a lot to do each year, and they don't have enough time or expertise to pass every law each year. And therefore it's necessary for Parliament to give away or to delegate some of its power to other people in order to make laws. And in order to do this, to give away the power, Parliament creates a Parent Act, otherwise known as an Enabling Act, in order to give that power. And the Parent Act contains information about who needs to be consulted and the process of going about making this delegated legislation. So there are 2 types of legislation. You've got primary legislation, which is an Act of Parliament, which is also known as statute, and you have secondary legislation, which is what we're focusing on today, which is also known as delegated legislation, and there are 3 types, as we will see. So the first type we are looking at is what is known as a statutory instrument. The first thing that happens is that an Act of Parliament is passed, and it gives the power to the minister in order to make more detailed law on the topic. The minister creates that law, and the piece of law that they create is known as a statutory instrument. So, as we say, it's government ministers within their departments, and the minister is given the power to make rules for the area of government for which they are responsible. So, the Minister for Transport will do things to do with transport, the Secretary of Health will do things to do with health. And there's somewhere in the region of 3,000 of these statutory instruments made each year. So, when are they used? They have quite a wide range of uses. It can be used to update laws, add detail, bring EU directives into effect, allow experts to make the laws, and to set a start date for a new piece of law, which is also known as a commencement order. So let's have a look at some examples. An example of updating law: the Department for Constitutional Affairs made changes to the provision of legal aid under the Legal Aid Act 1988, which is the Parent Act. To add detail, an example of the Parent Act is the Dangerous Dogs Act, and this allowed the Home Secretary to add more breeds of dangerous dog as and when it was deemed necessary. So allowing experts to make laws, the Road Traffic Act 1988 was the Parent Act, and it allowed the Minister for Transport to use their expertise to decide on the size and construction of motorcycle helmets. To bring EU laws into effect, the European Communities Act 1972 allows ministers to implement a range of EU regulations into a UK law. And to set a start date, the Human Rights Act was passed in 1998, but it was given the start date in 2000 by a commencement order. So the next type we need to look at is bylaws. Just a note on bylaws, the spelling, you'll see it spelled differently in different places. Whether you spell it BY laws, whether you spell it BYE laws, or if you spell it as one word, BYE laws, they are all correct. Don't ask me why, but that is the way it's done. So as always, delegated legislation starts with a Parent Act, which is an Act of Parliament, and it gives power to the local authority or a public corporation, a big company, to make laws on areas within their expertise, so either their local expertise or their particular subject of expertise. So for example, the National Trust is a public corporation that can make bylaws, and they can only make bylaws to do with their expertise on National Trust properties. So the Parent Act is given to the local authority, they use it to write the bylaw, and it becomes a piece of legislation. So it deals with matters which affect local areas or specific areas. And an example of a bylaw made by a council under the Clean Neighbourhoods and Environments Act, this allowed councils to set fines for people who allow their dogs to foul in public places. Another example of a bylaw created by a council was to ban drinking in the town centre, as occurred in Manchester in 2002 in time for the Commonwealth Games. An example of a bylaw made by a public corporation, organisations such as train services and bus services are allowed to impose fines for non-payments of fares. The final type of delegated legislation is what's known as an order in council. You have an Act of Parliament. There are two, the Emergency Powers Act and the Civil Contingencies Act, which give power to the Privy Council. And these people here, this is a historical Privy Council meeting. And they are able to sit, make decisions, and make pieces of law called orders in council. So the Privy Council is also joined by the Queen. So the Queen and the Privy Council act together to make orders in council. The Privy Council is a body made up of the Prime Minister and other leading members of the government and Parliament. So the leader of the opposition, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, the Speaker of the House are all also included. So an extremely powerful group of people. Their main aim is to make orders in council in emergency. This is where a normal Act of Parliament wouldn't be suitable because it would be too slow. And so the Emergency Powers Act was passed so that they could make these laws in times of emergency. So for example, after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, an order in council was made in order to stop flights in and out of the UK until security arrangements could be made. Orders in council are also made when Parliament isn't sitting. In 2003, an order in council was used to downgrade cannabis to a Class C drug as Parliament was on holiday at the time. And also, orders in council are used to pass powers when it would be inappropriate to pass a statutory instrument. And this is what happened when powers were passed from Westminster, so London, back to the Scottish Parliament after the Scottish independence vote. Scotland didn't vote to be independent, if you remember, but as part of the deal to remain as part of the UK, the Parliament had to give back some more authority to Scotland. So hopefully what you are able to do now, using the information that you've got from the previous slides, is answer the following question that I showed you at the start. So describe methods of delegated legislation for 10 marks. You'll define delegated legislation, and you'll be able to talk about the three types: statutory instruments, bylaws, and orders in council, by saying who makes them, when they are used, some information about the Parent Act, and 2 examples of each one.